Hello and welcome to Pre-Sales Pathways, the podcast that showcases highly successful pre-sales professionals and the career paths that they've taken. My name is Chris Clark, and today I'm joined by the brilliant Saskia van Daal. Saskia currently works in SE strategy and operations. So rather than focusing on individual deals, she's focused on scaling the success of the solutions organization as a whole. Now, whilst it's one of the more niche roles within the solutions organization, I think it's super valuable, super interesting, and I expect there's going to be a lot more emphasis on it with everything that's going on within the adjacent go-to-market engineering. So over the next 30 minutes also, you'll hear about how Saskia got into pre-sales in the first place, what her current role as SE strategy and operations lead for Snowflake involves, and last but not least, she'll share some of what's driven her career success so far. For anyone that's interested in projects and process improvement, this will definitely be a role that's interesting for you, and you'll really want to hear Saskia's story. So that's enough from me. Saskia, first of all, thank you so much for joining us on the show today. It would be great if you could please give everyone a quick introduction.
Yeah, of course, Chris. First of all, thank you for having me. I'm very happy to be here today. I'm Saskia. I live outside of London in the UK, and I currently get to support the Snowflake EMEA SE organization as their strategy and operations lead. So previously have been at Tableau, have been at Salesforce, have done various jobs before that, but now currently at Snowflake working with their wonderful SE team.
Fantastic. So Saskia, would love to hear a bit about your career history. How is it that you got into pre-sales and what the roles that you've done so far?
Yeah, of course. So I think my route into pre-sales is somewhat accidental. I think that is a bit of a theme for many of us, how we got started. I took a very different earlier path in my career. And I think many of us have. When we were young, we think we do one thing, and then it turns out completely different. I actually studied European politics. That's what my master is in. And then went off to Brussels to work at the European Commission, so quite different to where I am now. Realized I'm not a civil servant. That wasn't the path that I think was right for me. And then had a brief stint in management consulting, which by complete accident led me to my first SE role at Tableau. That was a while ago, obviously. And I think I was quite lucky in landing there because I had no clue that this role even existed. So I got into it because I had a friend who just started to work there, and she sold me this great story of how it's an amazing job and you get to work with customers, you get to help support them. Obviously, the product we were selling at the time at Tableau, they did data visualization, right? And I had some of my background was sort of statistics and analysis because I studied economics as well. And they were looking for a German speaker, and turns out that was all they needed from me, is that the background that got me in my first SE job. And I was hooked. I loved it. I loved working with customers. I loved solving the problems. I really liked being that interface, if you will, between translating more complex technical problems for an audience that really was focused on the value. And
fantastic. And so you moved from management consulting into the first SE role at Tableau. I'm presuming that was going to be an individual contributor role?
Correct. Yes. So I started as an SE on sort of more the, I want to say like commercial segments, so smaller customers, shorter sales cycles. As an IC, absolutely.
Got it. And then where did you go from there within Tableau?
Yeah, I then went into a team lead role, which if any of you is doing those jobs, hang in there. Sometimes they go underappreciated, is my view. Team leads are often, sometimes they're formal, as I've seen it, they're often informal roles where you sort of take the first steps into management. You don't have all of the responsibility, but you certainly also don't have all of that recognition, right? So that's my next step. And then I went into a manager role, again at Tableau in their SE org.
Got it.
And I did that for a few years.
Okay. And so you had this sort of like player coach role, team lead role for a little while, moved into line management within solutions engineering. Then what was next?
And then I did a complete shift again and went into product marketing.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what sort of drove that move?
So I think you will recognize a theme with me, right? There's like sometimes shifts here, but I promise there's a reason. And I think all of these are connected. And if you, in future episodes, I think product marketing might be an interesting one as well.
Definitely.
I personally have seen a lot of SEs that make that move from SE into product marketing. And when I had the job, a few of my fellow product marketers were also former SEs. So for me, the reason really was that while I still really liked the SE world, I felt like I wanted to learn more about the go-to-market as a whole. And for me, the area that was missing a little was how do we take our products to market from development over to pricing, packaging,
Yep.
launch strategies, because as SEs, you're obviously fairly close with your product org, right? You might give feedback, you might get roadmaps. You obviously have to be up to date on new feature releases, that kind of stuff, but you don't always get to see how that sausage is made in particular, right? So for me, that was always something that I was interested in. So that was what prompted me into product marketing. And also obviously because a big part of it, at least if you are in an international region, is representation, right? So you go to events, you go to conferences, you host a lot of maybe roundtables, that kind of stuff. And that's always something I really enjoyed.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
So you go from the SE role to team lead to managing, and then you move into the product marketing role. What then led you back into the SE realm, into strategy operations in particular?
Yeah, great question. So I did product marketing for a few years and I learned a lot. But I do think that these roles are most interesting and most impactful if you can do them at sort of headquarters.
Mm-hmm.
For many of us that work for American tech companies, those headquarters are not where we are.
Mm-hmm.
And there's, I think, a real limit sometimes to these roles that you do in the region.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, I think I came to a point where I was like, oh, maybe this is why I hit the end of where it's interesting to me.
Okay.
And I think for many of us who sort of found their calling in the SE world, there's always a little bit of a tug to say, oh, maybe I can go back into that world, right? And for me, I always loved working with SEs. Obviously, having been one and then having managed them, I then considered what else there might be, because obviously I could have come back into an SE or an SE manager role, but I have somewhat itchy feet. And I was like, what else is there to learn? And the timing was just right to then move into a role that I think is interesting in different ways to being an SE manager.
Yeah. I guess which brings us nicely then to your current role and to the remit of SE strategy and operations. It's a role that is probably quite new to a lot of the audience, still, to be honest, relatively new to me as well. Yeah, how would you describe SE strategy and operations at a high level?
Yeah, I do think there's some variation here depending on which company this role is performed at. So I can tell you a little bit about what my day-to-day looks like.
Sure.
Now at Snowflake, but I've done a similar role previously at Tableau as well, Salesforce. So some of you listening who are larger companies, you might have your own SE strategy operations partners. Some of you listening at smaller companies, you might scratch your head and think, I've never heard of this. So traditionally, these type of operation roles, a lot of them focus very purely on sort of business operations aspect. So that's fiscal year planning, that's org design, that's territories and compensation design, and setting all of that up so that everyone can hit the ground running when we start in a year, right? You have your territory, you're in the right team, you have the right quota, you have the right compensation, and you can then do your job, right?
And that's what people may have heard referred to as like sales operations or RevOps.
Absolutely. And for many of these roles, that is at a core. But in my view, there is a flavor that is quite specific to SE operations.
Yep.
And for me, that is obviously also maintaining the rhythm of our business. So I support our SE leadership when it comes to forecasts, when it comes to QBRs and those functional reviews. Again, this might be quite similar to what someone in a sales ops or field ops role does. But on the sort of SE side of the house, there's also always a variety of programs that are, I think, much more tailored towards the needs of the SEs.
Yep.
I can give you some examples of those as well, but for example, like tooling, right?
Yep.
Do we have the right tooling for our teams? Do we have the right enablement strategies, right? Like I'm not personally responsible for SE enablement, right? There's people that are specialists for that, they're experts in that, but we need to plan sometimes longer term as well, right? Like what should that enablement strategy look like? Do we have the right sort of specialization in our team? I think that's a challenge for all SE teams.
Yep.
The conflict between the breadth of a platform versus the depth, right? Like how are we handling this?
Yep.
And these are oftentimes challenges that is useful to look at with a longer view in mind.
Yep.
And that's something that typically sales ops doesn't think about to that extent.
Yeah, makes sense. And I guess there are some processes which are more specific to the SEs as well, or the SEs would get more involved in. I'm thinking things like proof of concepts, pilots, that sort of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, there's oftentimes infrastructure and architecture that underpins some of this, right?
Yeah.
So, for example, if you have an SE org that has a lot of RFP requirements, right? Is there something you can do to automate some of that? Is there tooling we can bring in to make that more efficient for them?
Yeah.
Right? I'm sure every SE team has a list of topics that they could rattle off that they would like to include here.
Yeah.
And then there's other aspects as well that that we tend to cover, which is around performance, right? Like what are sensible performance metrics? How do we run performance reviews?
Yeah.
And then more generally about communication, right? Like running all hands, like all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, makes sense. And one of the things, I guess part of the reason why a lot of people be unfamiliar with the role is because in smaller SE organizations, they don't necessarily see someone in that role, or they don't see a job listing for that role. You know, it might just be more a case of informally being pulled into projects to work on some of that stuff. I'd love to know, like, how does this role typically originate within an organization, and what sort of size organization, or are there other thresholds that would typically exist?
Yeah, it's a great question, because I do think it's, as to your point, one of the rarer roles, and it only comes to organizations of a certain size and scale. So what I think often happens is that all the aspects I just mentioned in smaller organizations are covered by different people, right? So you might have a central operations team that takes care of all the like compensation and org design and headcount planning and all of that. And then you might have some of the more sort of programmatic aspects that are owned by the SE leaders themselves, right?
Yep.
We come to a certain point where that gets really difficult to do, where you might have SE leaders that set the strategy, but they don't have the bandwidth to also execute on it.
Yep.
But what I've seen personally, and I think that's true for quite a lot of SE orgs out there, is that those leaders come to a point where they say, instead of me either doing it all by myself or putting all of it on my managers, it would be great to have someone there to help us, right?
Yep.
And oftentimes they use some of their own headcount to hire into these roles. And then they can give them all kinds of titles, right? They might call him a chief of staff, they might call him a strategy lead. It could be almost anything. But really, they bring those people in to help them execute and to help them set up processes that also scale. Because what happens all the time is that SEs obviously were smart. They build their own things if they need them. But then you also have a bunch of tools or dashboards that then need to be maintained as well and scaled up. And oftentimes that's where these brilliant ideas, they fall down, because SEs have a day job, right? They are there to work with customers. They're not there to maintain and scale and own programs.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. And so I'd love to know, with the role, appreciate it obviously varies between different companies, but you know, generally, are the bits that you've enjoyed more? Are there bits that you don't enjoy so much about the role?
Yes, I think everyone has those. Some of the favorite aspects of this role for me is that I get to act as an advisor and more as a business partner to the SE leadership.
Yeah.
And I love that because oftentimes I'm able to provide maybe a slightly different point of view, maybe something they haven't considered. And that's because, first of all, I have the luxury of having maybe a larger view. Currently support all of EMEA. So if someone is doing something in a certain region, I can then maybe say, hey, I've seen this work well in another region. Maybe this is something we can try, or have you considered X, Y, Z? So I always love that aspect of the role. And then also, you don't just work with SE leadership, but you work with people all across the different functions. So may that be marketing or HR or enablement, which I think is something that is really interesting for people that like that sort of connected stakeholder network. And I always really liked it, which I think if you're an SE, you have that as well, obviously, because you have, all your counterparts that you work with, but it's always very limited to your own personal sphere, right? Because it can be for your specific accounts and so on. So, and then I think the biggest one for me is being able to take that longer term view, right? We're not just talking about current quarter. We're not talking about next quarter. We might be looking to next fiscal year or the fiscal year beyond in some cases, right? Which I think is really exciting.
Great. And are there aspects of the role that maybe you don't like so much or that you prefer to drop? I mean, we all have something that we don't like about the role.
Yes, there are some certain aspects I would love to drop. I think some of them are more sort of the tedious aspects of operations, where sometimes feel like you do a lot of busy work that maybe you don't add a lot of value to, which is, setting certain things up for a large number of people where you think, oh, maybe I could automate this, right? Which again is exciting because in many of these cases we can. But I don't think anyone is there yet in operations at any org where they say, I've completely solved all of these little niggly things. And then I think the other thing that is sometimes tricky, and I would also offer as advice for people who are considering these type of roles, is that it can be hard to feel like you're getting a win when you work in sort of more back office operations. And I think this is harder for people who have had sort of sales adjacent roles before, where these wins are really clearly defined. You have them on a very regular basis, whether it's winning a customer, winning a new deal, or just getting that. I mean, anyone who's been an SE, that feeling you get when you work with a customer and it clicks, right? And you get them on side and you get into a flow. There's a different type of flow in operations, but the wins aren't as obvious.
Yeah. I mean, I can definitely relate to that. I did it after a few years in the sort of standard SE role, moved into an overlay role, and you're just that one level detached from the deals, that it's not to say you're having less impact, but you don't necessarily feel the wins as directly as you used to. Following up on the point around automation, obviously AI is top of mind for everyone, right? And you said that's one of the bits of the job that you like least, is the more sort of mundane, repetitive aspects. I'd love to know what's your perspective on how AI is going to reshape the role, or is already reshaping aspects of the role?
Yeah, I mean, it's the topic on everyone's mind, isn't it? And for me, I think it's sort of two different aspects. There's one that is more specific around my role and the larger operations roles. But then I think it's also a separate question almost on how is it impacting SE roles. And in my job, they're somewhat related because I think about both, right? But I think there's sort of different aspects to them. So on the operation side, I'd be lying if there wasn't a fair bit of anxiety. I think in the larger RevOps world, around what this means to some of these jobs. And what I try to, the view that I take in this is that I think it allows us to focus on the aspects of our jobs where we can provide the most value and the most impact, right? Like I don't need to be someone that enters values into spreadsheets and other tools. I add no value there. But the aspects of my job that we can't automate, which is judgment, which is empathy, right? Which is creativity. I mean, creativity, people will argue with me about. That's what we should focus on, right? So that's the view I take. And I'm personally super optimistic because just in my day-to-day, I've seen a huge shift. I feel like I'm so much more impactful these days because if people come to me and say, hey, I would love to work with you on this challenge, or I have this question about my business, can you help me? In the past, I sometimes had to say no purely because of bandwidth. And of course, that still happens sometimes, but I'm able to much better and more quickly kickstart those analyses, for example, to say, yes, you have a point, you have a good case here because look what I can show you. And these conversations happen more and more, and I think that's super exciting. So yeah, I want to be an optimist. I am, right now, a huge proponent of some of the AI tooling that I've got available. And at any given time, I will have 5 different things open and spinning in the background that I really like manage and check on. So, I mean, ask me again in a year what changed, right? I feel like weekly now we have new things and it's a little bit of a whiplash situation. But on the ops side, I'm a huge optimist. On the SE side, I also think in the last sort of year or last 6 months especially, it's been a huge shift. And it's been really exciting, I think, but it's also a cultural shift, I think, a little. In that, again, the jobs of SEs, and I'm not talking here about Snowflake in particular, but I think for most of the SE teams and orgs out there, they will have seen the day-to-day of their jobs shift, right? But expectations are different, productivity is different, but also the way that you can engage with customers is completely different. Right? I think we all know the value of having really dedicated, really custom engagements with customers that, again, we couldn't do for everyone in the past because we just simply don't have the time. But what I see now, what I see our SE teams produce with the tooling they have available now is incredible, right? The value that they can deliver to their customers in terms of, these custom solutions, these MVPs that are just spun up in an instant, but the customer immediately gets it because it speaks their language. It's brilliant.
I mean, anyone that's been in solutions for a while will be used to sort of thresholds existing for things like custom demos, and certainly for pilots and proof of concepts. And so much of that now is just the barrier to entry is being lowered so much, isn't it? So it's democratizes a lot of that to more of the sales cycles.
I think so. I do think there's a little bit of a risk here, and being maybe almost too trigger happy to engage in maybe opportunities that you could be qualifying a bit better. Right, I do want to maintain that discipline should still be there, right? But that I think that as a customer, your experience of engaging with your pre-sales person is so much better because you can almost fast forward in that conversation. And I think it's really exciting times. It almost makes me regret having been an SE 10 years ago, 15 years ago, and not now with all of this available,
Yeah, well, that's a nice segue into, you have done a lot of roles within solutions and more generally, right? You've touched on the SE role, SE lead, manager, product marketing, operations and strategy. I'd love to know, across the arc of all of that, your whole career, are there a couple of traits that you would attribute your career success to?
I mean, it's always weird if someone says your career success. I don't know if I feel all that successful. I do think that one of the sort of defining themes for me is that I'm always curious, right?
Yep.
And I think that curiosity is what has led me to all kinds of different opportunities. Staying still and staying comfortable, I think, is something that can be really dangerous. And for me, it's certainly not something that I enjoy. So I think that curiosity is something that, I don't want to say fueled my success. That feels kind of weird to say, but I think it's got me where I am today.
Yep.
And then I hope always coupled with a lot of empathy as well.
Yep.
Because for any of the roles that I've had, it's always been a huge part of my success dependent on other people's contribution, but also their success.
Yeah. Yeah. I love it. And I like when you're talking about curiosity, you know, a lot of people default there to they're talking about curiosity with the tech, but actually having curiosity in some of the different roles and responsibilities that exist. Because if you don't try something out, you don't know whether or not you would prefer or not that particular role. So I think that's great.
Absolutely. And I think that one can be a little bit scary for some people, right? Because I think there's sometimes a view of, oh, if I take this other path, it will have some irreversible consequences, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I've talked to SEs before who are considering alternative roles, maybe even within the same organization. They're like, well, I don't want to jeopardize what I have.
Mm-hmm.
And I always try to qualify that a little bit, because what I've experienced is that unless you work really hard, you never really close those doors, right? Unless you're actively trying to.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't see a huge ton of risk in trying something new. And
Mm-hmm.
even if you change your mind, it's been worth it for the learning. So I think that's some advice I would give people as well, especially those who are considering moving into management roles or moving into other roles in the go-to-market org. If you're not 100% sure, don't let that stop you, right? And I've worked with so many SEs, for example, who go into management and then realize they don't enjoy it and move back into IC roles, right?
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I mean, that's been a common theme on the podcast is, you know, don't let other people's perception of a particular role put you off going for it. And I always like that idea of, I think it came from software engineering, but they talk about T-shaped individuals where you've got depth in one area, but you've got enough experience of the sort of adjacent areas of the business that you have that broader perspective, broader context. I've always, been a big fan of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do think that sort of confidence is hopefully something that people like you can instill in SEs as well, who've been ICs for quite a while, that are looking to see what else there might be out there for them.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, as we've discussed, I think so many SEs, myself included, when I was in the role, are just not aware of all the options that exist, and often because the roles aren't formally listed, right? As you were talking about earlier on with this particular role, it might come from the demand placed on a particular SE leader. Saskia, I'd love to know again over your whole career, not just your current role, but what are some of the highlights for you?
Yeah, that's a good question, and I feel like I could spend maybe half an hour just on this one alone. I think one of the highlights, and that I will always cherish, is when I first got into the SE role. I think that culture at Tableau back in the time was super special. It was, and I think I want to believe that's true for a lot of SE orgs, where they have a culture around just being curious and being humble and being smart and being supportive of each other. And that was it was such a lovely way of working, where like your success is also someone else's success. And there's like competition, but in a really fun and friendly way. So that was definitely a highlight for me. And then I think another one would be the people that I've worked with over the years, especially with the ones that I got to hire or that I got to coach. Just seeing how they developed and where they are now, to me, is a huge highlight. And I know this might sound weird because I'm not responsible for their success. They are. But it gives me such pleasure to see, oh, they're doing so well now, and they're now here and they're doing this. and that I had maybe a tiny, tiny part of their story. That to me is a huge highlight too.
Of course, I'm sure you played a bigger role than you care to admit. But on a related note, you already touched on one piece of advice. But is there any other piece of advice you would share to anyone out there who's maybe earlier on in their career or is considering a move into strategy and operations specifically?
Yes, I think for people who are interested in my type of roles, I first of all, if you manage to find someone in my role, even if it's not named the same, but do have a good long chat with them, because it's always interesting to find out in your organization, in your company, what the different RevOps roles do, because they're not always named the same, and sometimes you find really interesting roles you would have never thought about, just because maybe they don't have obvious titles. So that's one part. But then, especially for those who currently have SE roles, really think about which aspects of your current job you most and least like, because while there is some overlap, a lot of the things that you might enjoy most, they might not be present in back office roles like RevOps, right? So for example, if the favorite part of your current job is working with customers, right? You have to have your eyes open to say, okay, that's not going to be part of it, right? My role is 100% internal focused. When I was in product marketing, I still had a little aspect of customer facing work, more in terms of sort of marketing events, roundtables. I work with analysts sometimes as well. Whereas now it's 100% working with internal stakeholders. And that's just something you've got to be aware of.
Yeah, I really like that. The role, SE role, is so varied, right? We do aspects of sales, of product marketing, of there's bits of product peppered in there, and so I really like that advice of sort of really reflecting on which of the aspects that you like and how can you make more room for them and less time for the bits that you're not so keen on.
Yeah, absolutely. But I will say that I have peers in my job at Snowflake who support other global regions also doing SE operations, and quite a few of them are former SEs and SE managers, right? So it is somewhat of a standard path for people to become interested in these roles.
Yeah. Saskia, this has been such an interesting conversation for me. I wanted to call out a couple of highlights. Firstly, the bit around how this role originates. I think, as I said, a lot of people, maybe they don't see someone with that title already in their organization, or they haven't seen a job listing for it, so they're not really, they don't know they exist. But the takeaway I'm hearing is, that your SE leader, might be the person to go to if they've got a particular pain point around running these projects and programs, and so, build that relationship and have that conversation. And then maybe the role starts as something different, like a chief of staff, different title, but similar sort of activities. And the second thing I really liked is your movement between different roles and parts of the business, from working in solutions, going into management, going into product marketing, giving yourself that broader perspective and getting a feel for which the parts of each of those respective roles you did and didn't like. I want to thank you again for joining us on the show today. Do you mind, for listeners in the audience who are interested in following along on your journey, can they follow you or connect with you on LinkedIn?
Oh, absolutely. And if anyone is listening who is doing an SE operations role, feel free to reach out. There must be dozens of us, right? Like, happy to hear from you as well.
Absolutely. Well, last of all, thank you to everyone that's listening. Really appreciate you tuning in. Please do follow the podcast on Spotify, or you can subscribe on YouTube, and we're also on Apple Podcasts. And hopefully see you on the next one. Thank you.
Bye.